All right, so first section of this week, starting in the book of Enos. And this week's reading is Enos through Words of Mormon. Within those, you have the book of Jerem, you've got the book of Omni. And within those books, you've got different writers with Amaleki, Amaron, Chemish, just different writers throughout all of that. In this part of the Book of Mormon, things can start getting pretty quick. And so you're covering a lot of history over a small amount of pages. And so I just think it's important to pay attention to some of the principles that come at this fast-paced time of the Book of Mormon. But we're going to start off just by the first 3 verses of the book of Enos. And the topic is parenting. The section heading is A Parent's Words Can Have a Lasting Influence. Chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. And I think before we get into answering this question of what messages do these verses have for parents and for children, is I want to first make a clarification on parenting. When I think to my life, parenting, people that had an influence, a parenting influence on me, was so much more than just my biological parents. Leaders in church, friends, parents of my friends, and uncles, aunts, grandparents. And so these principles of parenting expand so much more beyond biological mother, father, biological children. And so these principles, this is not a time to shut it off if you don't have any kids or don't have any kids at home, because the principles of parenting are for all of us. So in these first 3 verses, we are to pull out messages for parents and for children. And so Laura's going to start us off in this discussion, and we'll see what we've kind of pulled.
Okay, so the one thing that hit me first, which I love and I've thought about a lot, is in verse 3. He says, he went to hunt beasts in the forest, and he said, and the words which I had often heard my father speak sunk deep into my heart. And so like right there, that the words which I have often heard my father speak is what hits me. And it hits me because I still remember this. Elder David A. Bednar gave a talk, and I had to look up, the title was More Diligent and Concerned at Home. But I remember hearing this talk, and he talked about consistency in the talk and how it's important. He talked about having scripture study and prayer with his family. And like I grew up in a family that we had scripture study every morning at like 6 a.m, and family prayer and everything, and we were very consistent with it. And so I don't like, there's not one specific time that I remember like, oh, that was a great scripture study. I was half asleep most of the time. I don't remember like any real things I learned from it, but the consistency is what really hit home for me and helped my testimony grow with that. And so it's been good for me to remember that, because like Enos heard his father often speak of these words, often teach him. We're trying to do that with our kids, and I know scripture study with our kids can be fun. They like don't listen, they're bouncing off the wall. Sometimes like I just like try to get through it, just to do it. But we're doing it. We're trying to do it. We're not perfect, but we're trying to do these things to be consistent, to show them that it's important. And so I just love that, because he right here shows the importance of consistency in the home, and even for yourself, just trying to be consistent with the one thing.
Yeah. One part that kind of touched me is I love how Enos, commenting about his father, he said, knowing my father, that he was a just man. I thought that was kind of a cool phrase. I guarantee if you ask one of our kids, they might not think that we're the most just or the greatest parents. I feel like often rules,
You're so mean.
rules we set in the home are sometimes not taken in the best light. We just had an experience where last night, they were blowing bubbles out of their milk cups, and they were blowing in, and they were just making these bubbles, and both Laura and I asked them to stop, and then at one point I kind of explained, you guys are going to make a mess, and then Elsie was kind of doing it, and she spilt her milk all over the table. And Elsie's our little sensitive one. She started crying, and just, it was one of those experiences. I was like, guys, you need to understand that sometimes your mom and dad, we're not just saying things to be mean, we're saying things because we've experienced these things. So what I love about this is Enos is now a record keeper, right? So he is now an established, I imagine, a man. We see in the video, the little heading of the Enos video, that he's an older, he's a man, and he's now a record keeper. But he living those experiences with his family and with his mother and his father, and just growing up, he now as an adult was able to look back and go, I know that my father was a just man. And I just thought that was cool. He recognized it, maybe not just one experience, but through the experiences of his childhood up into adulthood, he was able to see the positive light of his father.
And I also, because it says, what messages do these verses have for parents and for children? One that I like for children, or I mean for any of us, but like for children, was at the end of verse 1, he talks about how he was taught by his father, and then he said, and blessed be the name of my God for it. And right there, gratitude. As we're, no matter what our family life was like, I mean, it might not have been the best, but like Peter said, it doesn't necessarily have to be your biological family. But like, look for the people that have taught you and be grateful. Think of those things and show your gratitude for that, because it's made you who you are. And I'm very grateful for the things that I've learned from my parents, but also from other leaders and from friends and from other people that I've just even come in contact with in the streets. You know, as we show that gratitude, I think we're opening our hearts to learn even more.
Yeah.
And so I love the thought of gratitude, being grateful for what we have been taught in our lives and what experiences we have had.
In light of that, another just kind of message to the children. I don't know how many of the children of our ward are watching these videos or not, but just something that I think a message to the children, when he was reflecting on the words of his father, the words that he often heard. And I find, and this is, we're all children, right? Like, we all have parents. This message of humility doesn't end once we're adults and become parents. We are still a child. We're always a child of God. We're always a child of Christ. We're always children to our parents. And I just think the attribute of humility is so important. Often as we get to a stage where we're kind of in either a leadership role, or you're in a role where you have stewardship, like you are a parent, we kind of shut off our learning. And I love that he was reflecting on the words that his father said. When someone speaks to you, no matter what their status is, if you display that attribute of humility, you will be blessed. And then on the counter side of, I loved that one of the messages that his father taught to the children, or to Enos, was the message of the joy of the saints. He wasn't just speaking of his own life. He was, in my opinion, from reading this, he was recalling examples of others. And Enos knew, whether he was a righteous or a wicked, or like most of us, a little bit of both, just throughout our lives as we grow, he knew that righteous living brought happiness. He knew that the saints had joy. He knew that they had happiness in their life. And his father, Jacob, made that a matter of helping his children to know. Yeah.
It's been really cool just looking at, I mean, it's only 3 verses. And so it's really cool to be able to kind of dive in and study a little bit differently this time with just, those couple of verses. So do your reading, read those 3 verses, and let us know what messages you specifically have learned about being a parent or a child in learning and growing about the gospel, and let us know what insights you have as well.